So you'd like to do van life, but you're not too sure how much it's going to cost you, and you pretty much have no money to your name? Same. I was in the exact same boat. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about how much it costed me to do van life in my Mitsubishi Express and how much the average van lifer kind of spends. So let's go somewhere a little bit easier to chat. That's a bit better. Okay, so one of the main things that you really need to think about before even getting a van or anything like that is, what is the kind of lifestyle you want to do? Do you want to have the luxury van life that you see on Instagram, or are you just really itching to get out there and explore? Because both of those budgets are going to look drastically different. I just wanted to get out there, so I went the cheapest option physically possible for myself and kind of just figured it out as I went. I did a no build on my van. I got a cheapest possible van that was automatic that I could drive. And I really just scrounged all my pennies together instead of trying to save money first and then getting something a little bit nicer. Now, in saying that, obviously I had a little less amenities. Certain things were more difficult for me traveling wise. I just wanted to get out ASAP. So I went as cheap as possible with both my van cost and conversion. My van cost was $10,000, which may seem quite expensive considering the age of the van, but he is an automatic. If I was going to get a manual, I probably could have gotten it for about a quarter of the price, but I wasn't planning to go ahead and just get myself a manual license during that time period. So I ate the cost there, but in terms of conversion, I spent like $300 maximum, because the only thing that I put in there was the metal frame, which I've spoken about before in my van tour, and I'll link it down below. I think it's a great idea, especially if you're only wanting to do it temporarily. And then also just fabric to make the curtains, which I will admit look hella dodgy. But aside from those two main things, everything else I pretty much had. So I really didn't spend all that much money on it to make it functional. In saying that, of course, I didn't have a toilet. I didn't have a shower. I didn't have running water of any kind. And my little gas cooktop was the one from Bunnings and, has to be used outside of the vehicle. So obviously there's quite a few takebacks from that. Whereas if you look at someone like maybe Cassadvantures, she has just blown up recently on TikTok. Her van looks much more converted, and she obviously spent quite a bit more than me. Cass has mentioned in one of her videos that she spent about $19,500 on her van and then another $12,000 on the conversion costs. And she actually paid somebody else to do it. And obviously her van is gorgeous. It is literally something you see from Instagram, and it's really cool. And it is probably a lot more functional than what I've got. And that's fine. But if you look at the cost comparison, she's obviously had to put a lot more money in just to get started. And she has said that she actually saved up a whole bunch of money. She doesn't need to work while she travels. Whereas for me, I had to. And I suppose that's where you have to really think about, what are your expectations when traveling? Do you want to work while traveling, or do you want to completely switch off and just enjoy yourself? For myself, I was okay with working, and I was okay with the fact of being able to meet different people through work. Whereas you may not want to do that. And so for Cass, she has been fortunate enough to be able to save the money first and then travel. So the comparison just to get started between myself and Cass is, I spent under 11 grand. I spent $10,300 just to get started. Whereas Cass spent $32,000. So obviously there's quite a price comparison there, but if you look in comparison to our vans, I look a lot more like a homeless person because I am doing it at such a cost-effective way. And she wanted more amenities and to have a more comfortable lifestyle, and also to do it long-term as well. Whereas I was more than happy to do it potentially as a short-term thing, potentially as something that I only do on occasion and may not do as a long-term thing. So obviously our expectations were different. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is how much you're planning to spend per week. In Cass's video, which by the way, I'll link below so that you can have that as a reference as well, is the fact that she spends about $500 a week, which I think is a very healthy budget. Whereas for myself, I spend between $200 to $300 per week, depending on whether or not I do a lot more travel in my van and need to refill my tank. So my budget is a lot tighter, The foods that I'm eating are a little bit more on the tinned spaghetti sort of side as well. And I explicitly only go to Aldi because it is a lot cheaper than going to Coles or Woolworths. So these are like just small little things that maybe she goes to Coles and Woolies, but I can't. So again, another small thing where you have to go, okay, what's the lifestyle that I'm wanting to have while on the road? Do I want to be able to go to any supermarket and be able to foot that cost, or am I going to go somewhere where I can get it as cheap as physically possible and just get by? Now, the thing is, not everyone wants to travel and just get by. For me, I didn't mind. I was just like, I just want to be on the road. And so I went with that option. Obviously, that's not going to be ideal for everyone. Some people want to do luxury van life, which I couldn't really find any luxury van lifers in Australia that really talked about their budget. But I would almost argue that they would probably be double how much Cass spends as a minimum. And if you've got that money, great. But if you're a young person like myself wanting to travel, I really hope that you can see now that it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank. You can still do van life. It just depends on your expectations. I think the really interesting part about doing it on a budget as well is that you have some different sort of challenges that you have to get through, and honestly, it makes for a good story. Obviously, do it for the plot. Like for myself, when I left, I had $300 in the bank. And you might be thinking, Tash, that is actually really dumb of you. And it was. It completely was. And I 100% admit that. But I knew that it was going to push me and force me to find a way to make money or get money from somewhere. And it did. I was able to get myself a job within the space of 2 weeks. And I ended up landing this really cool oyster farm job. And I met some really interesting people. The locals took me out for dinner. Mind you, I didn't ask. They just did it out of the kindness of their own heart. They were just like, what's for dinner? I was like, tin spaghetti. And they're like, no, it's not. Thank you, Tom. Much appreciated. Because of the fact that I was on a really strict budget, it meant that I had to be really strategic with where I went, what I did, and how I was traveling as well. Whereas if you've got a bigger budget, you can just relax and coast a little bit more. So for myself, I did not spend any money on camping ground fees. The only money that I spent in terms of camping fees was whenever I stayed at a national park, which is usually $6 entry. And honestly, those $6 entry nights were just phenomenal because I got myself a toilet, a drop toilet, mind you, not a proper one. And occasionally there was a shower. I was a very happy lady. But every other time I was stealth parking. So I was stealth camping. I was trying to minimize myself as much as possible so then I could be in that certain location. And if that's not something that you want to do and you want to stay in a campground, that's totally fine, but it obviously means that your budget needs to go up. Camping here in Australia, a lot of the campgrounds that I've looked at, cheapest site that I've found that's powered specifically is usually around $30. So if you look at that per week, it obviously adds up. But I will say this, if you are wanting to travel, there is always a way. And obviously sometimes it may be a little bit uncomfortable. You may need to do things that, you may not want to do. So in my example, was working. But in that, there's always going to be an experience that you're going to be able to tell people later and say, actually, that was really cool. The fact that I stayed at an oyster farm for 4 weeks and just taught people to shuck oysters, it's the most random thing in the world. But I'm really glad I did it. Okay, I had to base myself there for the weekends and then I had to drive out to go explore, but I wouldn't change it because number one, it allowed me to travel for longer. And number two, it also gave me experience that I would not have actually experienced otherwise. And working, especially in those more remote sort of areas, is going to give you a bit of a background on that area that you never would have seen otherwise. So I would 100% recommend it. But anyhow, I hope this video has been really, really helpful for you and has kind of demystified the fact that you need $100,000 to go ahead and get started with van life. All you really need is a little bit of grit and determination, and I've seen people do it in their own cars. You don't even need a van, in all honesty. But I hope this has inspired you to get on out there as well, and I'll see you on the next adventure.